Hello and welcome to our event with Alicia Sometimes for Manchester Literature Festival. I'm delighted to be speaking today to Alicia, who's joining us from Melbourne. She is our writer in residence through Manchester City of Literature. She's been virtual writer in residence at the wonderful Portico Library. So before we get started, I'll just tell you a bit about her background. She's a writer and broadcaster based in Melbourne. She's performed her spoken word and poetry at many venues, festivals, and events around the world, and she's regularly featured on Australian radio and television. She's the author of 2 poetry collections, Kissing the Curve and Soundtrack, and her work has appeared in Best Australian Science Writing, Best Australian Poems, and many, many journals. She was the director and co-writer of the Science Poetry Planetarium shows Elemental and Particle Wave. And in 2020, she won the Brewstar Poetry Prize. We are absolutely delighted to be speaking to you today. Alicia, welcome.
Oh, good to speak to you, Kate.
So you have written some absolutely wonderful poems for us as part of your residence. Why don't we hear some of those poems to start, and then perhaps we can continue our conversation.
The Portico Library, imaginings from far away. The swill of constellations, spinning wheel dome, features in my dreaming, refracted whispered light, swathes of stained glass, ridges and valleys of books, mantles of mountains. My longing is formless, ascending so I can lounge in the warmth of all your volumes, hymns of knowledge, the canvas of words, burning for the gaze of everything you hold. Strangers' books. 2 19th century logbooks were discovered by the Portico Library, and they held records of visitors that came between the 1830s and the 1850s, and this is dedicated to them. On the 7th of November 1840, Mr. Jones of Chester was signed into the library by 2 gentlemen, members of the Portico. Did he first look up at the saucer dome with its white curves enfolding plain glass and stop in the cloud of his thoughts? Did his friends gently tug on his charcoal frock coat to move him along? Was he an attorney, hat maker, honourable physician, brewer? Were his friends local, calico printers, cotton merchants, dry salters? Before he eased into an armchair in the reading room, did he open a book, running his fingers across wave-edged pages before he read one word? Did he glance at the news, the Manchester Chronicle and Salford Standard, or Manchester Guardian? Did he lose himself in reports of textile tycoons, the push for freedom of commerce and trade, anti-corn laws, and the growing urgency to help underage children who worked in unregulated, dangerous conditions? Did he sense the afternoon sun fading as he read new monthly stories from Francis Trollope's Michael Armstrong Factory Boy, or the serial of the Old Curiosities Shop by Dickens? Did he arrive for polite literature, or politics, or history? Was he conversing with keen travellers from Amsterdam, Naples, Paris, New York, Philadelphia, or Prague? Did he search every wall, reaching out for ornithology, or Mary Somerville's On the Connection of the Physical Sciences, so he'd have something to talk about that night? Did he drink tea as he elevated the oration about ideas and possibilities of the future? Did he depart from his friends with reticence as he walked down the Regency steps onto the street? Did he go about his day undaunted, not realizing the black ink of his signature would be seen 181 years later, and we would think of him then after reading in the Portico library, a stranger leaving the land of books.
We've just heard these poems, which are absolutely stunning. I think the thing that strikes me hearing them is just how successfully you, first of all, were able to kind of render the physicality of this incredible building. The Portico Library, if anyone, watching this has been there, many of you will have, of course. It's such an incredibly rich space with so much atmosphere, and amazingly, that comes through so much in your poems, even though you were, of course, never able to actually visit the library. How did you tackle that in this residency?
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? What an amazing library and what an amazing opportunity. And to have a virtual residency was just such a delight being here in Melbourne. And for most of it, being in some kind of lockdown in my house and not even being able to go more than 5Ks. So I had to almost imagine a different world, inside my head and inside my bedroom. So to delve into the Portico was just so delicious. And there was a couple of facets to this. One is that the Portico have a great collection online in videos. They take you through the street, they walk through the door, you're looking up at the glass ceiling, they take you past the shelves, and every moment the camera panned, I was like, oh, no, I want to focus on that a little more. But going into the different rooms and hearing about the history, that was fantastic. And I read a lot about it. And also placing myself in Manchester. So there's so much I didn't know. My dad's from Nottingham. I have a little bit of knowledge of England, but to learn about your history and the city and the politics and the culture and the vibrancy and the science that went on and still goes on, and your rich history of culture and literature, and was just so breathtaking and lovely. So to place myself in the Portico and imagine myself, in mid-19th century, walking up those, steps and Regency steps and going into the Portico, I just tried to imagine what it'd be like. Mm-hmm. And so when we time travel, when we're writers, we're imagining anyway. So I just had to imagine that I was in Manchester. Yeah. And we have some similarities with Melbourne. Out the front of our state library, there's a tram, which you have. Our state library is perhaps larger, but it's just so rich with that history. And anyone who's been to a library, you can smell the books. Mm. You can just close your eyes. And I love that the Portico has cups of tea. Wouldn't find that here in Melbourne.
Yes. It is an incredible space. And, I'd like to know first, maybe we could back up a little bit and talk about what drew you to this particular residency. It's a wonderful, wonderful scheme that now that we're part of Manchester City of Literature, we're part of the UNESCO network, we can bring writers like yourself to Manchester and kind of share, our cultural riches here. Whether it's virtually or in person, we're able to do it. And it's tremendously exciting for us here in Manchester. I guess I'd like to know sort of how you found out about the scheme and what drew you to it, what attracted you to the residency.
Yeah, it was one of those things, being in a city of literature in Melbourne as well, knowing how much that meant. And I remember when Melbourne sort of applied, sort of went for the city of literature and how important it is. And that's where I find that sistership, the kinship with Manchester, that Melbourne is very similar. We're just so in love with our culture and our football and, our science sports and a richness of life. And I found that quite compelling about Manchester as well. And so when I heard about this residency, I was so excited. And I just thought, what can I do? And I wanted to create time capsules and imagine reading these books that we've long forgotten. And they're books that especially I wanted to focus on the science, because I could focus on where do you stop? There's just too much
So I thought, oh, a little bit of the science. And what would it have been like? What was someone thinking at that time? And those books that we've forgotten were groundbreaking at the time. They were innovative. They just were looking outside of themselves. And some got the science very, very wrong. But that's the thing. That's the thing now, is that we're going to make mistakes and we forget these books were so important back then.
Yeah, it's a remarkable library. I mean, for people who are watching this and maybe don't know about the Portico, what shall we tell them about? It is such a special library, and it's so perhaps difficult to imagine if you live in a city that doesn't have places like this. Historically, it started as a private members library. Is that right? Yeah, I bet you know more about the Portico than I do now. So maybe you should talk about it.
It started as a private members library, and that you had to know someone to even be a visitor. And there were the strangest books that I spoke about. Kept records of these visitors that would come, but you had to know someone, and that kind of membership continues, long even in today, but certainly 30, 50 years ago, that a gentleman had to know another gentleman. And for quite a while, obviously, women weren't allowed into the Portico as well, and it had private membership. But I think what I love about the Portico is that it has that kind of history, but then absolutely turned that around and said, okay, not only are we going to be welcoming of so many people, but going to reflect that in our literature as well. And so you've got the past, and I knew there was going to be some great gems, some extraordinary trailblazing women on the shelves as well, that these men with their top hats perhaps were, and coats were reading. And the CEO and librarian, Tom Keat, was so amazing because he gave me glimpses into some of the prized collections of the Portico and just kind of steered me in ways as well, which was, at times diverted me in beautiful ways.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I mean, and coming to your poems now, I think, in the poem Strangers books, you really do give us that world, of this Mr. Jones of Chester, who is signed into the library. And you're really, in a very skillful and effective way, you're really speculating about the world that was around him, and giving us his full context in such a, it's not the longest poem in the world. It's amazing how much you get in here, though. You're really creating a world around him. And that poem is so wonderful to have because it feels like you're really taking in and addressing the context around this building, which isn't, it's not the bricks and mortar. It's like the kind of cultural context for it. Which it's hard to, really understand the Portico without understanding this about it and without understanding that it was a members library, it was gentlemen only, and that they had a particular relationship to these texts,
That's right. And so many radicals and great thinkers and, all sorts of political spectrum there. But people who really made a difference in Manchester and even in Britain and you could even say the world. So there was a lot of people associated where the library meant something, and it was a time to sit down and perhaps read books, but also the literature of the day. You've got to remember that, they're not getting tweets and updates online. And I say that frivolously, but anywhere you can get knowledge is incredible. But a beautiful central hub like the Portico is just so incredible that these people met. And what kind of conversations did they have? And some of the best exchanges have happened with that kind of conversation and happenstance where people talk and think about ideas. And I know the Portico was kind of that place as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and it continues to this day, to be a place where wonderful conversations are happening. I've been lucky enough to create some work responding to their occult collection myself at a previous commission. And, as a writer approaching their archive, it's hugely exciting. You're like, whoa, there's so much goodness here, and there's so much richness that it's almost, I don't want to say it's almost like I felt almost paralyzed with like, oh, I could do so much. I don't know what to focus on,
Yes. The occult.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
I know that
it was incredible, and that was really cool. But thank God I only had that one particular part of the library. So it was much easier for me. You really had to find your own pathway through this as an artist. And obviously with your incredible background in writing about science, talking about science and making work about science that kind of really, really brings it to people in a new, powerful way, it makes sense to me, of course, that you would have chosen the way that you did through that collection, I think personally, I've always been really fascinated by these kind of historic scientific texts, because the relationship these people had, it's just there's so much wonder there that you can see. There's so much they don't understand. Sometimes they think they do, and now we kind of, now we know better. We think we know better. The people coming after us, as you pointed out before, of course, they'll know better than we did. But I think that really comes through. And moving into your poems a bit more now, I think I want to talk about how you used the text, so the found text that you had, how you identified those texts, and I guess how you worked with them in terms of using found phrases and things like that. What was your thinking there?
Yeah, so I loved the fact that I could access these books online. I think that that's kind of why I wanted to look at 19th century work as well, was having that accessibility, so I could access them and delve right into them. But I was so surprised. I thought I'd skim a little more. And what happened was that I read something like 25 books cover to cover. Wow. And even a little dipped into a few more. You mentioned the cult, there was Satan, a biography. That was interesting, but had nothing to do with what I was doing. Right. And that's the kind of segue, when you get online and you're looking up pyramids and you end up analyzing stained floors or something. Wow. This is what happened. I'd get into one book and go, oh, they're mentioning that scientist. Okay, I better look at that book and then that book. And it just became bigger and bigger. And so it was really hard to know where to stop. But I loved that the moon, considered as a planet, a world, and a satellite by J. Nasmith and J. Carpenter, written in 1874. And what's incredible about it is that I got to see through Tom and, a webcam, the physicality of the book, because that is art in itself. It's 24 Woodbury types, which for anyone who doesn't know is a type of way of printing with mold casting and chemicals, and they play off photographs. And what Nasmith did was he looked through this massive telescope, which he built in Manchester and then moved elsewhere. But he sketched the moon, and he did it so beautifully, and he worked out the shadows, and he got the mountain ranges, almost to the to the size, and I say mountain ranges, but he thought they were volcanoes, and he had this whole thing, and okay, that didn't turn out to be right. But these Woodbury types are incredible because he sketched them, made models out of plaster and cast them, and then did this backlighting. And all of a sudden, if I put a few photographs in front of you, you mightn't know what was taken on Apollo and what was taken.
No way.
Yeah, they're incredible. I mean, on closer look, they look almost concretey and scratchy, but it's so beautiful, and it's a work of art. And I just loved that that's a physical thing that I actually couldn't touch, and I was, really wanting to do that tactileness. But I got to read it from start to finish, and I was so blown away by. He got so much wrong and so much right as well. But I just loved phrases like everything was Plutonian, and I was like, hang on, they haven't discovered the planet. Oh, what am I missing? Oh, underworld. Okay, underworld. That's right. All right. So it's these frame of references in these books, and they're referencing each other, and they don't mind mentioning God. They drop God all the time, just as natural as anything as well. And so just to think about the context, and certainly the politics as well comes into the science.
Yeah, I mean, like every poet in the world, I think I'm kind of obsessed with the moon, and I think that I was so pleased to see you'd written about the moon. And I just love the way this poem starts. If the moon won't come to you, let us build it up crater by crater. And you had me, right? I was like, yes, let us build it up. It was amazing. It's such a strong opening. That also, it has in it. So you're talking about the undertaking that they were doing here, but your poem is also doing that. And the moon that you're building up is their moon, which is so lovely. I think the language that you use here too, the kind of topography of the moon, the map of the moon, they're just so incredibly, the names sort of from mythology and various places are just so evocative, but I love the way that you really find the richness and the kind of lyricism in the language they use, the scientific language they use. You have here, Dr. William Huggins was right, at the moment of its occultation by the dark limb of the moon, which is just like, whoa, to me,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, sorry, I spoke so went off track from the moon and back, but so many quotes, and that's what you were saying. I had to use some of their lines because it was dripping in poetry. The dark limb of the moon and imaginary lunar travelers, and on it goes. So I wanted to speak from their point of view as well. So all of these poems are written with them in mind, from their point of view. Let's pretend we're in this time, and that we believe that Mars has seas everywhere, and that the ether is just a danger to you and I as much as
Well, since we're talking about it, why don't we hear that poem? The moon considered as a planet, a world, and a satellite. And then perhaps it would be good to talk about spectrum analysis in its applications to terrestrial substances.
Okay.
The Moon Considered as a Planet, a World, and a Satellite, a book held in the Portico Library, written by J. Nasmith and J. Carpenter, 1874. If the moon won't come to you, let us build it up crater by crater. The telescope has allowed keen eyes on its palette and attributes, measured plaster models as reenactment, geology of 24 Woodbury types, close-ups of the Valley of the Alps, Pico, Aristarchus and Herodotus, volcanoes, this new medium of photography against the sharp black of cloth, the physiography of all contours, inclines of rock, contorted chasms, vast black yawning depths, illuminated summits of central cones, scratch marks and lines of movement. Practicing with the back of a hand, watching light pool in the skin, taking pictures of a shriveled apple to construct ranges on a shrinking globe. We are lunar cartographers, deciphering codes of terrain. witnessing a solar eclipse, how the sun filters through. Dr. William Huggins was right. At the moment of its occultation by the dark limb of the moon, we will be certain our satellite has no atmosphere. We can become surveyors, an imaginary lunar traveller, every mountain backlit casting shadows, while we daydream touching dust. A silver-margined abyss of darkness standing on the surface as it glistens. We have for you in monochrome the powdery alchemy of observance. Spectrum analysis in its application to terrestrial substances and the physical constitution of the heavenly bodies. A book held in the Portico Library, written by Heinrich Schellen, 1872. Light is sleek and wordless, filling the intervals and pores of space, travelling without impediment, propagating in the body of the universe. An immeasurable sea of highly attenuated matter, imperceptible to the senses. Although the theory of light is now so completely understood, there are many ways to see clearly in this ether. The spectra not a ghostly apparition, but all colours united in a woven prism, belts of absorption lines, dark marks where light is restrained or absent, luminous vapours in shades revealing composition. We view the voltaic arc spiking an electric spark between metal poles in the stratum of air. Foucault's electric lamp, currents jumping gaps between two end-to-end carbon rods, or brightness as the Bunsen battery produces much discomfort to the eyes. Elements touching so their ends glow sharply, or incandescent lighting as the electricities attract, Geissler and Pluker's tubes, or a rainbow in rectangular, parallel-piped bars of glass. Limelight of the flickering stage, calcium oxide burning, a caged opera of glimmer. Noticing the swirls of planetary nebula or bursts of splendour with gas streams in the sun, balls of fire seen through a telescope, the importance of illuminating our past so we can explore directly in front of us. Who knows what light we can shine into the future?
Great. So the poem about spectrum analysis, I wanted to ask with this too, and it's just such an incredibly interesting poem because it's very lyrical again, and you again are working with that language, but you're also talking about scientific processes and research that perhaps not everyone is familiar with. Like, I have to admit, I didn't know what Geissler and Pluker's tubes were.
Yeah.
And it didn't perhaps interfere with my enjoyment of the poem, fortunately. But I guess I just wondered, as someone who's written about science quite a lot, here it's coming up in the context of sort of archaic science writing, but how do you approach that as a poet? I imagine you're often up against this problem of, I want to, work with, scientific language or scientific knowledge that perhaps not everyone has, but not in a way that is too didactic, right? And interferes with the flow of the poem. You can't be too explanatory, but if you want to include it, I guess, how do you think about these things?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, because forever, humans have looked up to the skies and wondered where we've come from, tried to comprehend it. There is no question that poets for millennia have been writing about science, and especially, you know, the stars and the sun, but also the grass and the way we relate to each other in biology and all sorts of things like that. So we've been writing about it forever, and so many wonderful poets and writers write about it. So I try to do that mix of, I want to get some science communication out there. Some like a lot of poets will write about the moon, but they'll write in metaphor. So they'll liken it to a relationship, and I absolutely think that's stunning. And some of my best poems, you know, that I've read are like that. But I wanted to always straddle, just have a little bit of surrealism, total lyricism. But I want to include some things, like I just love that you said you didn't know Gaius or Pluper's tubes. That you may go away and read about those.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I fail at that. I know that some people are going, what was that about? I'm not quite sure. But my planetarium show was like a love letter to gravitational waves. And what I wanted to do with that was just talk about the beautiful history of it, you know, that Einstein had come up with this, with the science behind it, and you know, it was nearly 100 years later, and it was discovered by LIGO, and the fact that these ripples in space pass through us without us knowing, and it's just such a big concept. And I know that a lot of people knew some things about it, but I wanted to tell the history of it, but also a little bit about the science, but also that normal thing that us poets or writers do. And give a bit of awe and you know, hyperbole and put relationships in there or whatever. So I wanted to do a little mix of both. And for me, when a 17-year-old came out and said, I was going to do chemistry as my major, but now I'm doing astrophysics.
Wow.
I kind of went, okay, my job's done.
Job done.
But yeah, how do you straddle? Sometimes I go one way and not the other. I know scientists might read something, and you know, I've said this so often before, but talking about mango juice squeezing from the heavens and sparkling like shark suits. Now, is that accurate about the Milky Way? No. But I like to put in some of those little things, but then also talk about gravitational lensing. So
it's a delicate business, you know, because what you're talking about is really speaking in several different registers within the kind of room of one poem, you know, and I think that's delicate work. You know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I really feel like it works very well here. But you know, the reader is free to follow it up or not.
Yes.
Every reader will be different. Some things, you know, we all have the power to just let some things go over our head and pick up on other things. And, you know, everyone will make their own way through this. And I think there's just a very deft balancing of the different elements here, you know, the kind of the knowledge, you know, in the scientific terminology, and the kind of lyricism and the weirdness, you know, the kind of surrealness and just wildness of thinking about science, thinking about the universe and these concepts, you know, in physics, and thinking about space. I mean, it's pretty crazy stuff, you know. Is that why you like writing about it?
Oh yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, we haven't got hours and hours of I'm so in love with science and all different aspects of it too, mostly astrophysics and physics and quantum physics, because I just want to know how things work.
Right.
But I love all sorts of sciences. But what I love about the spectrum analysis in its application to terrestrial substances and the physical constitution of the heavenly bodies is, and again, heaven comes into this. It was written in 1872, and it was on the threshold of electricity. So there has been some experiments. There's some success. There is forms of making electricity going on, but not safely in a home. Yeah. And you know, I again, when we talk about getting on sidetracks, I didn't know where the term limelight came from. And I just suddenly read this book and went, oh my goodness, and had to research what limelight was, literally, you know, these burning limelights on the stage. And so these electric lamps and currents and dangerous things that people did in the theatre or in very rich homes and at trade shows and things like that. It was just on the brink of something. And, you know, electricity was life-changing to have it in your home. So, yeah, I just love that they had so many theories about it and about how things were attracted to each other.
Yeah. Wow. It's wonderful that you have opened that process, that speculative process, up for us in these poems. Why don't we hear a couple more of those poems now?
Views of the architecture of the heavens in a series of letters to a lady, a book held in the Portico Library, written by J.P. Nichol, 1837. To Miss Ross of Rossi, these letters are respectfully inscribed. Madam, dear public, I cannot deliver you all astronomy, only paint the awe and sum of magnitude, motions of clusters in possibly infinite skies, the formations and expanse of space, our firmament, the entire mass of stars. Trace your finger around the line of the Milky Way as it branches in two, the shape and dimensions of this cluster, elongated as outlines are finely lost, a diffuse starriness in the ribs of galaxies. The intervals between each brightness, hollow black, external and obscure vacancies. Are the different suns isolated or related, patterned from the womb of nebulae, their effulgence softening in the distance? We study with the power of new telescopes, mapping and harvesting the upcoming, charting boundaries, pinpointing radiance, the filmy or nebulous fluid shining of itself, the birth of all things, gravity in firm control, endless diversities of character and contour. Here on earth we are infinitesimal. The great book of the universe comprehends so much more in comparison. This book, then, must seem sibylline, often incoherent, but we are not fragmentary. I can only hope to detail and share immensities, shimmer or phenomena, and the unity of all celestial things. Mysteries of Time and Space, a book held in the Portico Library, written by Richard A. Proctor, 1883. Even in the epoch of Tycho Brahe, we thought the stars were fixed. Everything is in constant motion. One day the moon will pack up its things, receding into the shivery sheets of space, fractured off from the earth and assumed the dignity of an independent body. This sleepy satellite, waterless and airless, will again retreat alone from any binds. The moon, a she, the sun, a he, the earth, ours. The sun with its orb-life lustre sways the planets by its attraction. It holds no perpetual energy, mortal and resplendent, a full eclipse with its streamers, a white halo and shining nimbus. The corona is a true solar appendage. The tenuity of comets leaving cold, hazy trails, electroid action of some kind. Not portents of catastrophe, but keys to knowledge. Mars in transit reflecting brightness. 9 of the seas have this peculiar shape, bottlenecked. These 5 stages of any world's life, glowing vaporous, fiery youth, life-bearing middle age, a measure of decrepitude, then ultimate death. When our home finally resigns, radiating iron will simmer, clouds brooding in thick atmosphere. The universe as we know it tends to an end, which may be the beginning of new forms of existence. These stories of unhurried movement become the dynamic narrative of time.
Okay, so can we talk about mysteries of time and space? This I thought was just such a wild poem. And this is the only one that starts with an epigram, or is it an epigraph? I can't remember. I always get them mixed up. But the quote from Louis Pasteur at the beginning, what is there beyond the starry vault? Yeah, tell us a little bit more about this one.
Yeah, I wanted to start with that quote because it's in Mysteries of Time and Space. Yeah. And throughout it, Richard Proctor quotes a lot of poets, and there's a few examples of poetry throughout it. And he is just so wondering about what is happening in the nebula beyond the stars that he can see, and how the nebula holding together. And he talks about, this kind of 5 stages of how every world exists. And he says, there's a glowing, vaporous, fiery youth. There's life-bearing middle age, a measure of decrepitude, and then ultimate death. So he talks about, going from vaporous to youth to middle age. And so he said every star is like that. Every planet, every thing, it goes through those stages. And I just thought that was incredible. And he likens it back to some poets. And I thought that was just incredible. But he talks about the electroid actions of the comets, and that they must have some kind of electricity going on in them. And he's just thinking out loud. And I just thought that was beautiful. And always using the language of the moon. Yeah. She's so beautiful.
Oh, the moon is always a she, and the sun is a he. Isn't that interesting? The earth hours, as you say, which I really, really resonates for me. Actually, that opens up a kind of way into talking about the next poem too, Views of the Architecture of the Heavens, in a series of letters to a lady. Because I feel like I had to say it in that tone of voice. Because here, this is a very masculine space, obviously. We're still at the time where scientific knowledge is a conversation, that is predominantly conducted by well-to-do men, right? And well-to-do white men across the ages are, they're the ones who get to do science. And the rest of us are, obviously it's none of our concern. But, here we have the moon, so there's a she in there. And then this one, I feel like, here's a woman at last, right? But of course, this letter is addressed, or this work is addressed to a lady, which I thought was such a fascinating concept. So what is this book?
This is really fascinating. And I love the way you say it, because every single time I read it, I go, to a lady. So it's natural, isn't it? You have to say it. So 3 years before, you've got the wonderful UK scientist, Mary Somerville, who wrote on the connection of the physical sciences. And she was such a great science communicator. She'd written a book before on all the places, mechanisms of the heavens, and she just not only interpreted his work from the French, but it elaborated on it. And she was an incredible writer. So you've got these incredible writers, and then you've got 3 years later, so that's the context that Mary Somerville says, I'm writing this for my country women to understand, for the populace to kind of come together. And by all means, it went into reprints. It was well respected. In a review of that book was the first time that the term scientist was ever used.
Really?
So, which is just incredible. William Wellwell, who's a scientist and theologian, wrote by analogy with artist. they might form scientists when talking about the idea of these people who look at the sciences. So he'd said it publicly, but this is the first time in a review of her book. And what I found so fascinating is he you know, says she's very masterly, if I can use that word,
Right.
and talks about her in a sexist way, but he absolutely raves about the book. So you've got then 3 years later when Nicol writes this book, and I didn't realise that to Miss Ross of Rossi, I tried to look for is this a particular person, and I went down many roads, but I found a scholar who said that this was just a way of addressing the public. So yeah, and so these letters are respectfully inscribed, Madam. So he writes this view of the heavens in 7 letters to this imaginary woman / public. And he's sort of saying, I can't deliver you all astronomy, but let me just tell you about the good bits. And so I genuinely love his passion and his science communication, and both Mary Somerville and, you know, Nicol and all these ones that I looked at were championing science and scientists and trying to really nobly work out what was going on. But he's wondering, you know, things like the womb of the nebulae, and, you know, there's lots of kind of references to things that give birth in the universe as these womanly things. And he even says at one point, this book is not as good as the great book of the universe, of course. Wow. It's not God's words, but it's pretty good. So there could be literally a Miss Ross of Rossi, and I know I did find some Rossies back then, but I think that, if I believe this scholar, that it was just dear public.
Wow. I mean,
fascinating.
It is amazing. You know, what a cool story. I think it's just such an interesting approach to, you know, to the text, to creating a text on his part. And, you know, for you to pick that out is just wonderful too. And using so many of these incredible phrases, you know, it's just a diffuse starriness in the ribs of the galaxies. That one got me in the ribs of my galaxies. You know, I just thought, wow, I love the way you're using the metaphor here. So, you know, you're kind of really looping around, you know, weaving these phrases from these incredible books that no one really reads anymore, you know, and it feels like you're really delving in and, you know, digging them out and making something new with them that really allows their beauty to shine. You know, it's really powerful stuff. And I feel like it's a wonderful endeavor too, because you're kind of really helping these wonderful books live again, you know, and in a way that resonates for us now. And I feel like it's a public service. So thank you very much, Alicia.
You know, so many gems in there. And I just have to say too that Nicol dropped in a series of letters to a lady, he dropped the madam part in subsequent reissues and just, you know, wrote the book and dropped the letters and said, I don't need to talk to women anymore. But thank you so much. And look, I can't thank the City of Literature, Manchester City of Literature, and of course the Manchester Literature Festival for making this happen, and to talk to you and to talk to the Tom Keefe at the Portico and just be part of this. It's just been the most incredible experience. And, you know, I could have just gone deeper and deeper and deeper, but I'm still writing. There's still poems that I just didn't get to finish because of time, but yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, please keep working on them, because this would be incredible to see, you know, as a collection or a pamphlet or, you know, something like that. I just think there's so much here, and you are certainly the person to write it, you know. So it's been an absolute pleasure talking about this work with you, and having you virtually here with us in Manchester. And thank you so much to Manchester City of Literature, of course, and the Portico and Manchester Literature Festival for having us here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Alicia. Nice
Thank you
speaking
so
with you.
much.
And to close things out, we're going to end with Alicia's final audio film of a State Library of Victoria's Dome.
Winter impulses lure me deeper into the sharp lip of books. Afternoons tethered to the multitude of narratives or non-fiction revelations. The sun curling itself into vowels so it can ribbon its way onto my notebook. Those times I have stood out front on cold grey stairs waiting for friends. Taupe columns welcoming the ceremony of day. The anticipation of opening an atlas or tracing inscriptions in the leaves of pages. Walking into the dome with its skin arched. The radial panopticon plan plumb with the dais. Once a place where a librarian sat staring as readers were immersed or skimming the dexterity and quilt of words. Green lamps light runways into the centre as the eye spins up into the starlit octagonal delight. Flickers of vertigo if you glance up too quickly. 34.75 metres in diameter and height. Its oculus nearly 5 metres wide. This geodesic structure resilient to stresses, a kaleidoscope of knowledge open to the light. The compressions and observances of language are like rafts tumbling wildly in our minds. This room draped in secrets, encased in the lyric of hope.